The candle flame flickered once and died. In the suffocating darkness of the Duke's bedchamber at Quill Manor, Seraphina Quill stood frozen beside the massive four-poster bed, a cold steel blade trembling in her right hand. A heartbeat later, the door crashed open. Murderer Thaddeus Quill roared, bolting upright, even though his bandaged eyes saw nothing. "She's holding a knife." Guards seized her, torches flooded the room with harsh orange light. Heavy boots thundered across the marble floor. Rough hands grabbed Seraphina's arms from behind, wrenching the dagger away. The blade clattered to the ground, spinning once before it stopped at the Duke's bare feet. "I didn't," Seraphina's voice cracked raw with terror. There was someone else. A shadow. He was going to kill you. But no one listened. Duke Thaddeus Quill, the man they called the Iron Duke, turned his blinded face toward her voice like a wolf scenting blood. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscle jumped. 3 years of betrayal had taught him one lesson: above all, trust no one. "Take her to the cellar," he ordered, voice low and lethal. "Wait." Lady Genevieve Quill swept into the room like a winter storm, her silver-streaked hair, loose eyes blazing with authority only a Duchess Dowager could command. "Release her at once," she said sharply. "This girl just saved my son's life." The guards hesitated. Thaddeus's scarred hands tightened on the edge of the bed. "Mother," she was standing over me with a knife. "And the real assassin fled through the window the moment the candles went out," Genevieve countered. "I saw the curtain move. If Seraphina wanted you dead, she would not have thrown herself between you and the blade." Silence fell thick and dangerous. Seraphina's heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. Her wrists still burned where the guards had gripped her. She could feel the Duke's suspicion wrapping around her throat like invisible chains. He couldn't see her, yet she felt stripped bare under that blind, unyielding gaze. Thaddeus exhaled slowly, the sound ragged. "Very well," he said at last, each word carved from ice. "She stays, but not as a guest." He turned his head slightly as though he could pin her in place with sound alone. "You will remain at Quill Manor as governess to my son Edmund. You will teach him. You will watch over him, and every single night you will know that I am watching you." Seraphina swallowed hard. The boy, 8 years old, silent since the carriage accident that stole his voice and nearly took his father's sight. She had heard the whispers in the village. They said the child hadn't spoken a single word in nearly 3 years. Thaddeus's voice dropped even lower, dangerous and intimate. "One wrong move, Miss Quill. One single shadow in the wrong place. And I will not ask questions again. I will simply end you." Lady Genevieve stepped closer, laying a steadying hand on Seraphina's shaking shoulder. For the briefest moment their eyes met, an unspoken promise passed between the two women. But as the guards withdrew and the room emptied, Seraphina remained rooted in place, staring at the man who now held her fate in his scarred, unseeing hands. She had come here tonight only to deliver a desperate warning. Instead, she had stepped straight into the lion's cage, with the lion already convinced she was the traitor. And somewhere beyond the walls of Quill Manor, Harlan Voss was still out there, smiling, waiting, pulling invisible strings that could destroy them all. The heavy oak door of the nursery clicked shut behind her, and Seraphina Quill felt the lock turn like a sentence. For 3 days now, she had lived under the same roof as the man who believed she had tried to kill him. Every morning, a footman escorted her from her small attic room to this bright, sunlit nursery on the 2nd floor. Every evening, the same footman returned her always under the cold watch of Mr. Calder, the butler whose silence felt heavier than any accusation. Edmund Quill sat at the low table by the window, 8 years old, and impossibly small in the oversized chair. His dark hair fell across his forehead, hiding eyes that rarely looked up. Since the carriage accident nearly 3 years ago, the boy had not spoken one single word. Seraphina approached slowly, her hands trembling as she set down the sketchbook and charcoal sticks she had begged Lady Genevieve to provide. "Hello, Edmund," she said softly, kneeling so their eyes could meet if he chose. "My name is Seraphina. I'm here to help you." The boy didn't flinch. He simply stared at the blank page in front of him, fingers curled tightly around a broken crayon. From the doorway, 2 pairs of eyes watched her every move. Duke Thaddeus Quill stood motionless, one hand resting on the frame, his bandaged gaze turned toward the sound of her voice. Beside him, Dr. Elias Crow adjusted his spectacles, lips pressed into a thin, displeased line. "Report to us at the end of every lesson," Miss Quill the Duke said, his deep voice carrying the weight of command. "Every word, every drawing, every breath she takes near my son, Doctor. I want to know." Dr. Crow gave a small, satisfied nod. "Of course, Your Grace. We cannot be too careful. After all, some wounds run deeper than steel." Seraphina felt the sting of his words like a slap, but she kept her eyes on Edmund. She had seen that same hollow look before in her own reflection the night her father sold her future for gambling debts. She knew what fear looked like when it lived inside a child. That afternoon, while the Duke and Doctor waited outside, Seraphina began to draw. Not letters, not numbers. She drew a simple scene: a boy standing in a garden, holding a red balloon that floated just out of reach. She slid the paper toward Edmund without speaking. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly the boy's small hand reached out. His fingers brushed the charcoal. He added one shaky line. Then another. A dark shape appeared behind the boy, in the drawing tall, faceless reaching. Seraphina's breath caught. She didn't ask what it meant. She simply handed him another sheet. Outside the door, she could hear the low murmur of the Duke's voice and Dr. Crow's eager replies. They were already deciding her guilt. Days blurred into one another. Every evening she stood in the Duke's study, forced to recount every detail of the lesson, while Thaddeus sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, blind eyes fixed somewhere above her head. Dr. Crow always stood at his right, ready to twist her words. "She is using drawings to manipulate the boy's mind, Your Grace," the doctor said one night, voice smooth as oil. "Classic technique of charlatans and fortune-tellers." Seraphina's hands clenched at her sides. "I am trying to reach him," she whispered, voice cracking with exhaustion and frustration. "He saw something that night. Something terrible. His silence isn't defiance. It's terror." Thaddeus leaned forward slightly, the firelight carving harsh shadows across his scarred face. "And how would you know what my son saw, Miss Quill, unless you were there?" The question hung between them, sharp as the blade she had once held. She wanted to scream the truth, that she had come to warn him about Harlan Voss, that she had risked everything to stop the assassin. But the words died in her throat. He would never believe her. Not yet. Outside the manor walls, the rumors spread like poison. Harlan Voss made sure of it. Whispers reached the village first, then the neighboring estates. The new governess was the girl with the knife, the woman who had tried to murder the Duke in his own bed. Lady Arabella Voss, Harlan's beautiful and ambitious daughter, was seen riding through the countryside with a smile that never quite reached her eyes, telling anyone who would listen that only a strong marriage alliance could protect the Quill name now. Seraphina heard the servants whispering when they thought she wasn't listening. She felt their stares, their fear, their judgment. Yet every morning she returned to the nursery, and every morning Edmund drew a little more. One evening, as golden light spilled across the floor, the boy pushed a finished drawing toward her. It showed a carriage overturned on a rain-slick road, a man with bandaged eyes lying motionless, and in the shadows, a tall figure holding a pistol face hidden beneath a hooded cloak. But the most chilling detail was the small boy hiding behind a tree, watching everything. Tears burned in Seraphina's eyes as she looked at Edmund. He was trembling. She reached out slowly, not to touch him, but to place her hand palm up on the table, an offering, not a demand. For the first time, Edmund placed his small, cold fingers in hers. In that quiet moment, something fragile and precious passed between them. A trust so small it could still be crushed by a single word from the Duke. Later that night, as Seraphina stood once more before Thaddeus and Dr. Crow, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like stones, she made a choice. She would keep fighting for the silent boy who had finally touched her hand, even if it meant the Duke and his doctor continued to see her as nothing but a liar, a threat, a girl with a knife who had somehow slipped through the cracks of their guarded world. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond Quill Manor, Harlan Voss tightened the noose, waiting for the perfect moment to pull it closed. The nursery had become Seraphina's only sanctuary, and her quiet battlefield. Each afternoon, when the sun slanted golden through the tall windows, she sat on the floor beside Edmund with nothing but paper and charcoal between them. No forced words, no pressure. Only the soft scratch of charcoal against paper like two broken souls learning a new language. She drew first a mother bird with a wounded wing protecting her chick from a circling hawk. Edmund watched for a long time. Then his small hand moved. He drew the hawk with sharp talons. But this time the hawk wore a heavy signet ring on one claw, a ring Seraphina had seen once before on the hand of Harlan Voss when he visited the village. Her stomach twisted. Night after night, the drawings grew darker. Edmund sketched the overturned carriage again, but now he added details he had never shown before a second man standing in the shadows, handing something to the driver just before the horses bolted. A small vial, a gloved hand. Seraphina's fingers trembled as she studied each new line. She understood what the boy could not yet say in words. Someone inside Quill Manor had helped make that accident happen. Still, she said nothing, because every evening she had to stand in the Duke's study and face the two men who already believed she was poison. Thaddeus Quill sat behind his desk, shoulders rigid, bandaged eyes turned toward her voice with unnerving precision. Dr. Elias Crow hovered at his side like a shadow always ready with another accusation. One evening, the doctor placed a small glass bottle on the desk with deliberate care. "Laudanum traces your grace," he announced smoothly. "Found in the tea Miss Quill prepared for the boy yesterday. She is slowly sedating him, and quite possibly you as well. A common trick used by women who wish to gain control over powerful men." Seraphina felt the blood drain from her face. "I have never touched laudanum," she whispered, voice shaking with quiet fury and fear. "I would never harm Edmund, never." Thaddeus didn't speak at first. His scarred fingers drummed once against the wood, the only sign that her words had reached him. Then he said low and rough, "My son smiled today." The sentence fell into the room like a stone into still water. Seraphina's breath caught. She remembered the moment, the tiny hesitant curve of Edmund's lips, when she had drawn a silly picture of a horse wearing a gentleman's hat. The first smile in 3 long years. Thaddeus leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. I heard it in his breathing. Lighter. Different. For the first time since the accident, he sounded almost at peace. For one fragile heartbeat, something raw and vulnerable flickered across the Duke's face, a father's desperate hope breaking through layers of ice and suspicion. But Dr. Crow quickly stepped in. "A dangerous illusion, Your Grace. Children are easily manipulated by affection, especially silent ones." The moment shattered. Later that same week, Lady Arabella Voss arrived at Quill Manor in a swirl of silk and perfume. She was breathtaking porcelain skin, golden curls, and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She moved through the drawing room like she already owned it, laughing lightly at something Lady Genevieve said, while her eyes kept sliding toward the Duke with calculated warmth. "I worry for you, Thaddeus," she murmured, when they were briefly alone near the fireplace. "A stranger living under your roof. A woman who once held a knife to your throat. Father says only a proper alliance can silence these ugly rumors before they destroy what's left of your family name." Her words were sugar-coated, but the threat beneath them was steel. Seraphina, passing by the open door with Edmund's latest drawings tucked under her arm, heard every syllable. Her chest tightened with helpless anger. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Seraphina slipped back into the nursery to put away the charcoal. She found it by accident. A folded letter slipped between the pages of Edmund's sketchbook. Her hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting was elegant, masculine, and unmistakable. "Continue feeding the boy small doubts about his father. Make him fear the Duke. When the time comes, the child will be ours to control. Voss will reward you generously. Burn this." Seraphina stared at the paper until the words blurred. Someone inside the house, someone close enough to leave notes in the nursery, was working for Harlan Voss. Her mind raced. If she showed the letter to the Duke, he might finally believe her. Or he might decide she had planted it herself to save her own skin. Dr. Crow would twist it into more proof of her guilt. She would be thrown out before sunrise. But if she stayed silent, the betrayal would continue. Edmund would remain trapped in fear, and the man who had already tried to kill Thaddeus once would try again. She pressed the letter to her chest, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Tears stung her eyes as old memories flooded back the night her own father had sold her future for coins, the feeling of being powerless, of being seen as nothing but a tool. She couldn't let that happen to Edmund, not this innocent boy who had finally begun to trust her. Seraphina closed her eyes, breathing slowly, the weight of the choice pressing down on her like stones. Tomorrow she would have to decide. Stay silent and protect her fragile place in this house, or speak the dangerous truth and risk losing everything. The nights had grown longer at Quill Manor. Duke Thaddeus Quill no longer slept. He paced the darkened corridors until dawn, and the echo of his boots the only sound breaking the silence. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Edmund's latest drawings, the overturned carriage, the gloved hand, the signet ring that belonged to Harlan Voss. Tonight was no different. He stood alone in his study fingers, tracing the edges of the charcoal sketches his son had created. The boy's small, hesitant lines told a story Thaddeus had refused to believe for 3 long years. A soft knock broke the stillness. Seraphina entered her face, pale, shoulders tight with exhaustion. She carried one final drawing, the one Edmund had pushed toward her only hours earlier. "Your Grace," she said quietly, voice barely above a whisper. "I know you don't trust me, but you need to see this." She placed the paper on his desk. Thaddeus reached out his bandaged eyes, useless, yet his fingers moved with painful care over the surface. He felt the lines, the shapes, the unmistakable outline of a face so half hidden in shadow, but the jaw, the cruel curve of the mouth. It was unmistakably Harlan Voss. His breath caught. Before he could speak, the door burst open. Dr. Elias Crow stormed in 2 footmen behind him. "She has done it again." "Your Grace," the doctor declared, voice ringing with triumph. "I found laudanum in her room. She is poisoning the boy and you to bend this household to her will. Arrest her. Now." The footman moved toward Seraphina. She didn't run. She didn't beg. She simply stood there, eyes locked on Thaddeus, waiting for the final blow. Then came the sound that stopped every heart in the room. A small, trembling voice. "No." Edmund stood in the doorway, barefoot in his nightshirt, clutching a fresh sheet of paper in his shaking hands. Tears streamed down his cheeks, but his eyes, those wide, haunted eyes, were fixed on his father. For the first time in 3 years, the boy had spoken. He walked forward on unsteady legs and thrust the new drawing into his father's hands. Thaddeus's fingers moved across the paper. He felt the strong lines, the cruel eyes, the heavy signet ring on the hand holding the vial. It was Harlan Voss, giving orders to the driver on the night of the accident. The Duke went very still. "Edmund." His voice cracked raw with disbelief and pain. You saw him." The boy nodded once, then buried his face against Seraphina's skirt, small body shaking with silent sobs. Thaddeus felt the world tilt beneath him. Everything he had believed, every wall he had built, began to crumble. Lady Genevieve Quill stepped into the room, then her face lined with quiet sorrow. "I should have told you sooner, my son," she said softly. "I knew Harlan Voss was behind the accident. I discovered the letters months ago. But I stayed silent because I was terrified he would come for Edmund next if I spoke. I thought protecting the boy meant protecting the lie." Thaddeus staggered back a step, one hand pressed to his chest, as if the truth had physically struck him. "All this time," he whispered, voice breaking, "you knew. And I blamed her." His bandaged face turned toward Seraphina. She stood motionless, one hand gently resting on Edmund's hair, the other clenched at her side to stop it from trembling. "I never asked for your title," she said, barely audible. "I never asked for your wealth. I only wanted to keep one innocent child from carrying the same nightmares I once carried." Something deep inside Thaddeus Quill, something frozen for 3 long years, finally cracked open. The suspicion that had kept him alive now felt like chains he no longer wanted to wear. He reached out blindly, his scarred hand finding Seraphina's arm. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. "I have been cruel to you," he murmured, voice thick with regret, "when all you offered was kindness and courage." Seraphina's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of his hand, not as a threat, but as the beginning of something fragile and real. Dr. Elias Crow tried to speak, but Lady Genevieve silenced him with one sharp look. "Get him out of my house," Thaddeus said quietly, danger threading through every word. "And send word to Harlan Voss. Tell him his game is over." As the footman dragged the protesting doctor away, the study fell into heavy silence. Only the sound of Edmund's quiet breathing remained. Thaddeus kept his hand on Seraphina's arm, as though afraid she might vanish if he let go. "I don't know how to begin again," he confessed, voice low and rough with emotion. "But for the first time in 3 years, I want to try." Seraphina looked at the broken man before her, the powerful Duke reduced to raw vulnerability, and felt her own guarded heart soften against her will. This single moment changed everything. The walls were finally coming down, and in the quiet space between fear and trust, something tender and unexpected began to bloom. The rose garden at Quill Manor was in full bloom, heavy crimson petals trembling in the evening breeze as the sun dipped low on the horizon. Duke Thaddeus Quill stood at the entrance of the garden path, shoulders squared, blind eyes hidden behind fresh bandages. He had called this meeting under the pretense of discussing a marriage alliance with Harlan Voss and his daughter, Lady Arabella. But tonight, there would be no alliance, only truth. Harlan Voss arrived first, confident and smiling, his heavy signet ring catching the last light. Lady Arabella walked beside him in pale silk, her face a perfect mask of concern and beauty. They believed they were walking into victory. They had no idea they were walking into judgment. Lady Genevieve stood quietly to one side, her hand resting protectively on Edmund's shoulder. The boy clutched a thick folder of drawings against his chest, small fingers trembling. Seraphina stood a few steps behind them, heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She had not slept. The letter she had found still burned in her memory. She knew what tonight could cost her, and what it could finally set free. Thaddeus Harlan began warmly extending his hand. "I'm glad we could settle this matter like civilized men, for the sake of both our families." Thaddeus did not take the offered hand. Instead, he spoke, voice low and steady, carrying across the garden like distant thunder. "Edmund has something he wishes to show you." The boy stepped forward on shaky legs. Seraphina knelt beside him, her voice gentle but clear, as she translated each drawing into words the others could understand. She described the overturned carriage, the vial passed in the shadows, the man with the signet ring giving orders. With every sentence, Harlan Voss's face grew paler. When Seraphina reached the final drawing, the one showing Harlan's own face clearly in the moonlight, the merchant took one involuntary step backward. That's a child's fantasy," he sputtered. But his protest died when Dr. Elias Crow suddenly broke. The doctor, who had been brought in as a witness, fell to his knees, sweat beading on his forehead. It was him, he cried, pointing at Harlan. "He promised me money, a title, everything. I only helped poison the horse's feed. I never meant for the boy to see his confession spilled out in a frantic rush, every detail matching the drawings exactly." Harlan Voss's mask shattered completely. The powerful merchant who had pulled strings for years now stood exposed, trembling with rage and fear. Thaddeus took one slow step forward. "You took my wife from me," he said quietly, pain threading through every word. "You nearly took my sight. You tried to steal my son's future, all for greed." He turned his face toward Seraphina, voice softening. "And when this woman risked her life to stop your blade in the dark, I repaid her with suspicion and cruelty." A heavy silence fell over the garden. Thaddeus reached out, finding Seraphina's hand. His scarred fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "Before my family, before my household, and before the man who tried to destroy us, I offer you my deepest apology, Seraphina Quill." His voice cracked raw with emotion. "I was wrong. I let fear blind me far more than any injury ever could. You asked for nothing but the chance to protect my son, and in doing so, you saved us all." Tears slipped down Seraphina's cheeks. She squeezed his hand back, her own voice, barely a whisper. "I was so afraid you would never believe me. I believe you now," he murmured. "With everything I am." Lady Arabella stood frozen, her perfect composure finally broken. Harlan Voss was led away by waiting constables, his empire of lies collapsing around him. As the last light faded, the tension in the air began to dissolve. Thaddeus kept Seraphina's hand in his, as they walked deeper into the rose garden. Edmund walked between them, small steps, growing steadier with every breath. Lady Genevieve followed a few paces, behind a soft, knowing smile on her lips. They stopped beneath the oldest rose arbor where the scent was sweetest. Edmund looked up at his father, eyes shining with unshed tears. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then spoke the word he had carried in silence for 3 long years. Father. The single word hung in the warm evening air, fragile and powerful all at once. Thaddeus dropped to one knee, pulling his son into his arms. A broken sound escaped his throat, half sob, half laughter, as he held the boy close for the first time, without the weight of fear between them. Seraphina watched them, her heart overflowing. In that quiet garden, under a sky painted gold, and Rose's 3 wounded souls found their way back to one another. Thaddeus rose slowly, still holding Edmund's hand, and turned to Seraphina. He lifted her fingers to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss there. "You taught me that justice is not vengeance," he whispered. "It is choosing to trust again, even when every scar tells you not to. You taught me that courage looks like a woman who stands between darkness and a frightened child, and a man who finally dares to open his heart." Seraphina smiled through her tears. "And you taught me that I am worthy of being believed." They stood together as the sun disappeared, the 3 of them, and Lady Genevieve, watching with quiet joy, bathed in the soft afterglow. The shadows of the past had not vanished, but for the first time in years, they no longer controlled the future. This is a story about how real justice is born, not from revenge, but from the brave decision to trust again, and how giving someone a second chance can heal not only their wounds, but the wounds we carry inside ourselves. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process, but every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.